Hey, Rooted, here we are. We are at week 8, I think. I don't know. I'm lost. I'm not even sure where we're at. But I told you that if you went into Rooted, it would be a life-changing experience. I bet you did not think that this is the kind of life change I was talking about. Anyway, so here we are, or here I am, and there you are. And we're going to be talking about money. And it kind of seems like a weird time to be talking about money. I don't know if there's ever a great time to be talking about money, but right now feels particularly, difficult to be talking about it. But the scripture talks about it a lot, and it's something that we can learn about. And so let's jump in. So here's the deal, is Christianity has always had an interesting relationship with money. And it's because we view money so different than the rest of the world does. Let me read you a quick quote by Tim Keller. He says this: "The early church was strikingly different from the culture around it in this way. The pagan society was stingy with its money and promiscuous with its body. A pagan gave nobody their money and practically gave everybody their body. And the Christians came along and gave practically nobody their body, and they gave practically everybody their money." And so he makes an interesting observation, is in a secular culture, it's easier to talk about and to even give away our bodies than it is to talk about and give away our money. And so the Christian view of money, and sexuality for that matter, is kind of the opposite of what secular culture tells us. Is we are more comfortable discussing what we do with our bodies than we are what we do with our monies. And so the way that I kind of make fun of this or point this out is, we have groups all around the church that deal with sexual immorality. Maybe if you're dealing with an addiction to pornography or living with somebody, that all that kind of stuff. And we have accountability groups where people say, "Hey, I want to get access to what you're viewing." So they've created these software where it will send an accountability partner the websites that you have viewed for the day, just to make sure that you're not viewing anything you shouldn't be. Now, here's what's weird, is if we did the same thing with our finances, people would be totally freaked out. If you, in your Rooted group, had accountability partners, and at the end of the day, it gave a summary of everything you spent your money on, that just seems crazy to us. Well, it's because somehow we view money differently than we view everything else. That somehow we don't have to be accountable, and we don't have to think about what we do with our money. And so I want to take you through kind of a scripture that Jesus talks about money and how he views it, and he talks about it a lot. But here is the underlying kind of teaching, the underlying understanding of what we're supposed to do with our money as Christians. The summary is this: that we are supposed to honor God. And that not only, of course, is what we're supposed to do with our money, but that's what we're supposed to do with our entire lives, is we're supposed to honor God with it. But if we are talking specifically about money, it's not only honor God, but we're supposed to be sacrificial givers. And the reason is because we worship a God who has sacrificed for us. And so as we become more like him, we become more sacrificial in everything that we do, including the giving of our money. And so this doesn't just mean we give out of our extra or the excess. And for some of us, we're a little bit worried about that, to be honest, is we're not sure if there's going to be any extra or excess. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit in the Q&A online, or you guys can text in or call in or submit some questions and I can answer those. But what happens when our finances go down? My wife and I recently had this discussion, I think it was actually yesterday, where we were talking about, well, what happens if? What happens if the church is not able to operate for a while? What happens if we have to take a pay cut? What happens if we have to lose our, what happens? All the what ifs that you might be asking as well. And so we were really tempted to stop our giving. And we weren't talking about our tithes. We're pretty good with that. We were more talking about our Giving to the Path Forward campaign, that extra giving. And we both came to the conclusion that we can't afford not to give, because this is the time that we want to lean into God and trust him with our finances. Because it's in the times when you're most concerned, and maybe you're in the midst of a trial or a test, that we really get to see, do we trust God with our finances or not? And so we just said, okay, we're going to continue to give. We're going to continue to be faithful and just trust that God's going to take care of us. So anyway, let's go back to that scripture. In Luke 12:15, Jesus begins to talk about greed. And so many of us, we do not believe that we're greedy, right? That is one of the, if I asked 10 people, hey, what's the thing that you struggle with the most? I can almost guarantee you that none of them would say greed. Because greed is one of those things that hides from us. It's something that we can't see in ourselves. We might be able to see in other people, but we can never see it in ourselves. And it doesn't matter if you're wealthy, if you're poor, if you're somewhere in between. Greed is something that we all struggle with. And so here's what he says. He said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And so greed, as defined here, is an inordinate desire or dependence on money and material things. And so he says this, he says, watch out or be on guard. And he says this because, as I mentioned, that greed hides from us. It's one of those sins that is different than the rest of the sins, which is we can't see it. So Jesus never says, be on the watch out for adultery. Because no one has ever woken up or turned over or looked and said, oh my goodness, you're not my spouse. Where did you come from? I had no idea. No, because we know when we're committing adultery, for example. But we don't know when we're being greedy because it's something that can just sneak up on us. It's much more difficult to see in ourselves. It's much easier to see in other people. And in fact, we like to point at things in our life or circumstances or times in which, well, I gave to this Christmas drive or I gave to somebody in need. And so we say, here's the time that I was generous with my finances. But everybody can point to those. Being a generous person is more about a lifestyle of generosity than it is about a one-time generous thing that we've done. So he finishes with this. He says, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. So the point of life is not to get more money or more stuff. And all of us would say, okay, yeah, duh, we know that. There's more to life. There's relationships, there's love, but so many of us live our lives as if this were true. Think about how many hours of the day we spend thinking about how to get more money and more material goods, or even just spend money on things like experiences. Maybe that's your thing. And so then Jesus explains to us the consequences if we decide to continue to allow greed to hide from us. And he does this in a form of a parable. Here's what he says. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. And so we get the scene. It's already a rich man, and now he has gotten even more wealth because he's producing a large crop. And here's what he does, and this is kind of a spoiler alert, is Jesus is about to point out something really important. Because he's about to point out what you do with your extra. And extra is defined as you've already had your needs met. That's, food and water and shelter and clothing. And what you do with your extra is an indication of what really controls you, where your heart really, really lies. He said this in verse 17. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And so this is super relevant to us. Is one of the biggest booming industries, at least as of right now, we'll see what happens in the future, but is storage. There are storage units popping up everywhere because people have run out of places to put all of their stuff. And so the reasonable question is, now that I've got all of my essential needs, what should I do with the extra? This guy says, well, I'm going to save it. I'm going to store it up. He's not going to give it away. He's not going to invest it. He's going to save it. And so verse 18 says this. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And so you have to imagine that the audience response at this time is good for you. In fact, you might even have been blessed by God, because imagine as a farmer, you have these crops, and the way that crops grow is through the rain, and who controls the rain? Well, God does. And so God has blessed you with an abundance of things. And our response is, if we were to look at our own lives, and maybe we've been blessed financially, is good for us. We worked hard, we pursued the American dream, and we have been rewarded for it. But, and I think it's tax time right now, and so maybe I'm just thinking about this, but those barns are also a good write-off, right? That's a business expense. And so he is being smart. Not only is he making money, but he's saving money, and so he is doing the right thing. Well, of course, you're going to see that Jesus is going to take this in a different direction. Here's what he says in verse 19. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. And see, here's how we see that money begins to, and wealth and greed begin to blind us, is it becomes what I like to call a counterfeit God. The Bible calls them idols. And it is something that takes the place of what only God can do. It is a God substitute. And so here's the three reasons why I think money can be dangerous. And it's not that money in itself is a bad thing. It's not at all. Money can be used for incredible things. Money can be used to change people's lives. I'm talking about the love of money, this idea of greed hiding from us. And so here's why it becomes a struggle, is because we believe that money and finances, and a lot of you guys, as we're maybe concerned about the future, and I get it, I'm there with you, as we look at the economy and what could be taking place and potentially the loss of jobs, I understand the fear and the worry. I get it. But we can also fall into that category, is even when we're worried about not having enough money, we become dependent on it. And here's why, because of these three things: significance, satisfaction, and security. First one, significance, is we believe that somehow if we have enough money that we are going to be significant, that we're going to be worthy, that we're going to be valuable. I went to New York a few years ago, and it was pretty amazing because even growing up here in Southern California, Orange County, LA, very wealthy parts of the world and in the United States, you go there and there is a whole new class of wealth. And you can tell the people who are wealthy get their own private cars and SUVs and all that kind of stuff. And they feel like their value is based on the fact that they have a driver waiting for them on the curb. Well, somehow our society has come to believe that if you have enough money, then you are a significant person. Think about the most influential people in the world right now. Think about the people that we admire. A lot of them are because they have become wealthy. We also believe that it's going to bring us satisfaction. If you are anything like me, there is this underlying feeling, and you may know that this isn't true, but there's this underlying feeling that if I have enough money, then I'm going to be happy. Now, despite all the evidence of watching all the wealthy people in the world just be complete disasters, I somehow have convinced myself I will be different. If I have, significant amounts of wealth, and then I'm going to be okay. And even if everybody else is miserable, at least they're miserable and wealthy, because it's better than being miserable and poor. Well, it's kind of a reason why we start to worship money, is because we think that somehow it's going to bring us happiness. Now, I'm not going to say that money doesn't bring you happiness, and I'm not going to say that money makes you unhappy. What I'm going to say is that money or wealth, it will magnify what you already are. And so if you are a person who is full of joy and purpose and meaning, then that money is going to be just another tool that you have to pursue those things. I know some very wealthy people, and they have dedicated their wealth to being able to do missions and ministry, and really they see it as a tool that God has given them. But I also know lots of people who are just completely miserable and are wealthy. And then security. For some reason, we believe that if we have enough money in the bank, that somehow we can control the uncontrollable. Well, during these times, we know that this is just obviously not true. It doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank, coronavirus still might get you. The economy still may tank. Your kids still might, go off the deep end. Your marriage still could break up. Somehow we believe that we are going to be able to control the uncontrollable around us if we just have enough zeros in our bank account. Well, Jesus says that it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you cannot add a minute to your life. That there is no amount of money that is going to be able to bring that kind of control into your world. And so when you put things into perspective, it doesn't matter if you have $100 in the bank or $100 million in the bank, there is nothing that you can do to fix this. And so that's why Jesus says this. He says this in verse 20. Then, he's talking to the man with building the barns, who his life is going to be taken from him. He says, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And so Jesus points out the fact that no matter how much money you have, at the end of the day, that money that you have spent your whole life working towards and trying to accumulate and that you have saved up, someone else is going to get it. Now, it might be someone else because the market's going to tank and somebody else is going to get it. It might be because you end up getting old and passing away and then your spoiled little rich kids are going to get it. At the end of the day, you don't get to take it with you. And so the thing that you've dedicated to your life at the end of the day is going to be lost. And then he says this in verse 21, he says this in the feeling of devastation and loss. When we lose the thing that we've been pretty much focusing our whole life on, when we lose that, this is how it'll be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God. And so if you think that your resources and your money are solely for your consumption, you will realize that you have acted like a fool. That in the end you will be totally devastated, because you've been a bad steward of what God has given you. And so if you think about the place that you are right now, And whether you're afraid, whether you're not, whether you feel secure, whether it feels unsecure, whatever it is, if you think about the position that you're at in life right now, where you were born, where you live, the talents and resources you were given, if you think about all of those things coming together, one, it humbles you because you see how much is not in your control, but also it should bring incredible gratitude because all the things that you have were given to you. Now, I'm not saying you didn't work hard. I'm not saying that you didn't make sacrifices. All of those can be true, but at the end of the day, the very breath in your lungs was not up to you. The fact that you cannot sustain your very life, it shows that we have to be incredibly thankful for what we've been given. Not that we should feel guilty because God has blessed us. Also, not that we should be worried because we don't know what the future is going to be, but just understanding that we didn't do this on our own, that this is a gift from God. And so it also brings a reassurance that God is going to continue to take care of us just like he has in the past. So let me answer a couple questions I get asked all the time. So what does this mean? What do I need to do? Do I just give my money away? Well, here's what I would say, is why don't you start with the Bible basics? And so there's this thing called tithe. And tithe is in a pattern in the Bible that talks about giving away 10%. And some of you guys are freaking out going, I don't even know how I'm going to pay my bills. I get it. But what if we use this as a time? And this might feel even like a little counterintuitive, is during the time when we're most stressed about our money, what is the time that we step up and we start to begin to trust God? Some of us, this is your last resort. You have to trust God in this. And that's exactly where he wants us to be. And so what if we use this as an opportunity to say, God, I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds my future, and so I'm going to continue to trust you. And the way that we do that is we give back to God. And so this is tithe. 10% is the aim. And that's kind of the historical pattern to tithe. But maybe you're thinking, I can't do that. That's overwhelming. Don't just do nothing. Start with something. Start at 1%. Start at 2%, at 3%. I want to be honest. I haven't told anybody this, but hey, I feel like we're all in this together. Is my wife and I dedicated in this last year to give 20% of our income away to the church. And I got to be honest, it was way before all this stuff kind of hit the fan and the economy's going crazy and the coronavirus and all that. But we dedicated to this, and we didn't dedicate it. And if you do this, God, then we're going to do this. We said for the next year, we're giving away 20% of our income. And of course, it happens in the year that all this chaos, but we trust, and we're going to continue to lean in, and we're going to continue to trust God. And so what should we be giving? Pick a percentage, just make sure you start giving. And give until it hurts. That's kind of the whole deal, is we got to give until it hurts, because when it starts to hurt, that means that we're starting to build muscle, a faith, a spiritual muscle. And so when we give until it hurts, we're building that trust that we have. And so the standard for giving is sacrificial. C.S. Lewis says this, he says, I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. In other words, if our expenditure on comforts, luxuries, amusements, etc. is up to the standard among those with the same income as our own, we are probably giving away too little. And so I've kind of come up with over the years the 5 P's of giving. And maybe it's easy for me to remember, hopefully for you. First one is giving a priority. Priority is I have to make sure that this is first. So we give in the order of our priorities. And so you may be tempted to say, okay, well, here's my priority list. God's first, and then it's going to be my family, and then it's going to be... But then you look at your giving, and it doesn't reflect your priority list. And so give in the order that is your priority. So if you say God's first, then give to God first. Trust him first. But if your giving reflects something different, which is date night is more important than me, or more important to me, or my hobbies, or my kids' sports, or if that is where you're primarily giving, or giving just in first, that's really a reflection of your priorities. Second one is percentage. What percentage do I want to give away? And so one of the things that I would challenge you to do is look at the percentage, because everybody feels like a generous person. Everybody feels like I give and I continue to give and I give in different ways, and everyone thinks they're generous until they look at the numbers. And so I would dare you to look at the percentage that you gave away in this last year. What is the percentage of your income? So find out, here's how much money I brought in, here's how much I gave away. What is the percentage that I gave away? I think you'll be shocked to find out you're not as generous as you might believe. I think the stats are most Americans give away only 2% of their income a year. And so as Christians, we have to do better than that. We have to, because not only do we trust God, but he's commanded us to. And so we want to become generous people. In the Great Depression, you're thinking economy and during the Great Depression, people gave away 3.5% of their income. So they gave more during the Great Depression than we do in the times of economic growth and prosperity. A person who who makes less than $20,000 a year is 8 times more likely to give than a person who makes $75,000 a year. And so we always want to have this excuse like, well, if I made more money, then I would give more. Not true. It actually becomes more difficult the more money that you make. And so the rule of thumb is start with a percentage. You should aim for 10. But if you can't do 10, you're just like, I'm not there yet. I'm just not right. Just do something. Next is progressive. Am I giving progressively? And so if you started at a percentage every year, aim to go a little bit higher. So like I said, my wife and I don't say this to like try to be super spiritual. I wasn't even planning on telling anyone this, but I just feel like we're kind of in this moment is we aim for 20% this year. Scary. I got to tell you, it's terrifying with 3 little kids, all this stuff, but we just felt like that's what God was calling us to do. And so I said, if we don't give generously, personally, how are we supposed to expect anybody else to do it as well? And then this one's about the heart perception. How do I perceive both rich people and poor people? Do I look at rich people and poor people as if their value and their worth are the same, or do I value one over the other? Because that really is an indication. Do I admire people for the wealth that they have, or do I admire them for their character? And then last is this is plan. Do I have a plan in place to give generously? So if it is up to us to give when we feel like it, we will give sparingly and sporadic. But if we want to become generous people, where we really grow our generosity in our heart, we have to have a plan in place. And so I kind of put, it's kind of like a diet and exercise. If I want to fight against obesity, I have to come together, I have to put a plan together to eat right and to exercise. And it's not going to happen if I go to the gym once in a month and I just work out super hard that day and I don't really eat anything bad and that's not going to get me in shape. And that's kind of how a lot of us give is, oh, my heartstrings are pulled and so I'm going to give to this and I'm going to give in this season. But that's not going to fight greed in your heart. And so the only way to fight greed is just like you're going to fight obesity, is through a plan. What am I going to do in order to put a plan together to fight this? And it has to be a consistent and long-term plan. And so my wife and I, we give every 2 weeks. It just automatically comes out of our paycheck because we don't want to give depending on the season or depending on, what project's coming up or what. We just want to say we want to be generous no matter what. And so we've come up with an understanding between both of us. It's just coming every 2 weeks out of our paycheck, and we want to fight that greed in our life. And so take it, go. And so I'm sure you have lots of questions, and during this time, hopefully you have an opportunity to submit those questions. We're going to have people that are going to be chatting live with you as you are watching this, and hopefully responding to, because we usually do Q&A live, but we're going to be doing it virtually this session. So I hope that you are safe. I hope that you are healthy. I hope that you are encouraged, because we here at Seacoast are really seeing this next season as an opportunity to do ministry in a new way, and hopefully you will join in with us. God bless.